Welcome, everyone, to our next episode on the VTCLA Podcast. With me today is Catherine Delneo, who is the Commissioner of Libraries for the state of Vermont. And she's here to talk about a number of things that are related to literacy and education, and of course, the function of the Department of Libraries in the state. We're happy to have you here today, Catherine. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So I'd like to start just by you telling us a little bit about yourself and your professional journey to the roles that you currently play.
Sure. Well, I'm from Vermont. I grew up in South Burlington, and I've been back here since February 2022 when I took on the role of Commissioner of the Department of Libraries and State Librarian. My route to becoming a librarian was pretty short, but a little bit circuitous in a way. I started out with a lot of interest in philosophy and just the world in general. And I enjoyed using libraries a lot when I was a kid. And then when I was in college, I had focused on primarily on sociology and philosophy. And then I thought to myself, wow, I'm probably unemployable. What will I do next? Where did I like being in this life so far? And I really hit on libraries. I've always really enjoyed libraries. My school library at Orchard Elementary School in South Burlington had a great school librarian, and every chance I could get, I went to the library. I used to get the Golden Apple Award, which was this little trophy for using the library the most. So I really see the library as my happy place, and I thought it would be great to help other people see the library that way. So after college, I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I studied library science, and I have a master's in library science, and I have a concentration in school libraries. I actually did a little time working in school libraries in Somerset County, New Jersey, and really just doing an internship. I realized that probably for me, the public library setting might be a little bit of a better fit. I get a little bit nervous with public speaking sometimes, and it felt like every time the new class came, there was quite a lot of public speaking, and it was a little bit less of researching and kind of having that choose your own adventure path that I was interested in helping kids with. So I shifted into a public library role pretty much for my entire professional career. So I started out in Somerset County Library System in Bridgewater, New Jersey, as a youth services librarian. And then initially I worked with grade school kids, and then we had a huge department there. It was really wonderful. Then I switched over to working with teenagers, and I really enjoyed working with that age group and working closely with school librarians and working a lot with the reading specialists and teachers in the community. Doing book clubs after school, at the middle school, that sort of thing. Lots of book talking. And then in about 2006, I moved out to San Francisco to become a branch manager of the Park Branch in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. That position was really interesting to me because I both could be in a managerial role and still be a full-time children's librarian. Apparently my math skills aren't strong because that's two positions and one person, but it was a really rewarding 7 years or so that I spent doing that. And then I had an opportunity to become the interim assistant chief of the main library in San Francisco. And I took that on and then became a permanent in that position. And then the chief of branches left, and some colleagues were like, "You're the only one who can do it, apply." And I applied, and I spent about 7 years as the chief of branches. So overseeing public library service in 27 branch neighborhood libraries, which was really, really rewarding and really challenging. But I've always been homesick, and I saw the Department of Libraries posting the state librarian position, and it was a little bit of a pipe dream. And I thought, well, I'll apply. What could it hurt? And I did the first interview, and it was just such a nice experience. I don't know how to explain that, but the interview was really great. I met with two members of the board and former Secretary of administration. And one of the board members, the president of the board at that time, was actually the neighbor of my elementary school principal. So it was really just sort of a shocking small Vermont world story. Um, and I think that they could tell that I really love our state and I really care about lifelong learning and really about access to information and trusted sources and the things that I'm really passionate about kind of came through, I think, in that conversation. And then there were a couple of more interviews, but at each point I thought I was not moving to the next interview. I was convinced I would not get the position. Even when meeting with the governor, I was like, this can't possibly be. And I still sort of feel that way, that it's just a really lucky thing that I've gotten this opportunity to serve Vermonters this way. And my team is so welcoming. And my two assistant state librarians, Tom McMurdo and Jeanette Schaefer, really had been kind of keeping the department moving along when there wasn't a state librarian for a period of time. And they have done so much to get me oriented to the state. And I'm surrounded by people who are passionate about libraries and supporting libraries every day, which is kind of the dream. So it's been really nice to be back in Vermont.
Well, that's a great story. Yeah, Haight-Ashbury. Wow, just such a cultural hotbed. It must have been a great experience for you.
It was, and what was really kind of cool is, I grew up using the Fletcher Free Library a lot. I actually see a lot of commonalities between the Fletcher Free Library in Burlington and then the library that I worked in, and then the community in Burlington and the community that I served. The Fletcher Free is a much bigger library. The Park Branch is kind of, I think of it like a one-room schoolhouse sort of library. It's just one big open room with two service desks and everybody's there together. But that community spirit and that kind of multi-use, and that there are people who have lots of resources and there are people who have no resources. And I really focus a lot of energy and time on the people who need library service the most. I think that branch manager position was open because it was probably a hard one to fill, but I really found it rewarding. And we served a lot of teens who were experiencing homelessness, who hadn't felt welcome in their own communities and had run away from home and were living outside. And getting them linked up with services was something that we worked a lot to do, to try to kind of bridge those gaps. Sometimes I would even walk a kid over to a nearby youth support center to get them connected with folks, and building those connections with agencies that served people who had high need in our community was really a rewarding thing to do. And I think that, the aspect of kids and adults, and there were $4 million properties, flats coming up on the market in the neighborhood. And then there were people in rent controlled places since the 60s. And so there was just this really wide band of, a really wide group of people that we served. And people were so generous with each other and kind to each other in the library. And I really wanted everybody to feel welcome there. So that was one of our goals, was just really making sure everybody could use the space together. And I was always impressed by what people had in common. Once they would see each other reading a book and talk to one another about it, it really was that third space community living room, which was really great.
Speaking of having things in common, the members who will be listening to this podcast all love literature and probably have a very special place in their hearts, as do you, for libraries. So talk a little bit about what does it look like across the state in terms of public libraries, the commission, and kind of your role in managing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So our state is really interesting in that we have many, many, many independent public libraries. And that is different from a lot of other places that I've worked previously. And most other states have more of a county system, or more of a more cooperative regional systems. In Vermont, we have 187 public libraries. About 2/3 of them are municipal public libraries, and about a third of them are incorporated public libraries. They all provide those core functions of, print materials, databases, electronic materials, and more over the past 15 to 20 years, focusing on programming for the community. I think everybody remembers being a kid and seeing that there was story time going on and maybe attending story time. But now the focus in libraries is really much more on that programming piece and convening conversations. In Vermont, the way that statute is written about public libraries, it's clear that they have two functions, and that one of them really is that community center. That for a lot of Vermont communities, the public library is the only building that's really still functioning and operating as a center for the community. So hosting meetings, hosting voting, bringing in performers, really bringing people together to talk and to be with their neighbors. Those are all things that we at the department work to support. And so we do a lot to support public libraries in the state. We also offer support to school libraries and school librarians as needed, and to academic libraries. So we are really tasked. We have a very broad mission. So we're, in addition to serving the general public and libraries statewide, we also provide support to the 3 branches of state government and to Vermonters with special needs. So we have lots of different stakeholders. Luckily, there's a lot of overlap in what people need. So at the department, we provide a key service that I hope that teachers around the state are all familiar with, which is the Vermont Online Library. And it's a suite of databases, and schools and public libraries and universities, colleges can all get people using those resources to really have reliable information and access to resources that they might not be able to otherwise afford. We also have moved into the ebook and e-audiobook realm with the Palace app, which is a statewide platform. We focus a lot on the core titles and things that are in the kind of the perpetual license realm, so that when we're using state or federal dollars, we're buying something that we'll continue to have access to. We also are the coordinators of interlibrary loan around the state. So some of the staff in our department are really helping to move materials between locations. And we do that with a courier system. It's primarily academic and public libraries that are on the courier, but there are some schools involved in it. And we would love to see even more schools get involved with the courier system in the future. And that's a really key thing because so many communities have very small libraries with not much shelving space. So this gives them the opportunity to share resources and borrow resources. And then our department coordinates materials coming in to the state from out of state through interlibrary loan, and also going to other states through interlibrary loan. Vermont has a lot of books coming in and not as many coming out. And I think that that really speaks to the challenging budgets that folks have in the small spaces. But that service is really key to us. And one of the things our team does is we administer federal funds. So the Institute of Museum and Library Services is the federal funding source that we work with the most. And about a third of our budget is made up of funds from IMLS. And those funds support that courier interlibrary loan service. They support the Vermont Online Library. And they also support our network library of the National Library Service, which is the ABLE library. And that's how we really try to help folks who have special needs related to print to access materials. So they have a really large collection of audio materials that we make available to people who are eligible for that service. So people of all ages. And that service is really key, I think, for youth particularly, because we're the public library of people who have print disabilities. So it's a different role than a school library. And kids who are signed up for special access to materials that they're eligible for because of a print disability of any type, including learning disabilities, they can get a card through us at the Able Library so that they have access not just to what they're reading in school, but to anything that they're interested in. So that's a really key service that we provide. And we've been a network library since the 70s. And that's partially funded by IMLS as well. And a really big thing we do is that the state of Vermont doesn't have a master's degree program for librarians. And a lot of people aren't making all that much money working as librarians, and they can't afford to go to a program for a master's. And we provide continuing education and professional development. And we administer the Certificate of Public Librarianship, where we train people to have the skills that they need to perform the role of library directors primarily. So we have staff who are in consultant roles who teach classes and who bring in experts to teach classes, and who also then do direct consultation and support as people have questions on any number of things. That's a lot of what we do. I'm sure I've missed something.
Yes, I'm sure you have, but thank you.
Yeah, there are only 18 of us, so it's a little bit interesting to see that all of that is going on. We're also right now, I should mention, normally there are 18 of us, but we have 2 additional staff who are working on capital programs. So there are 2 opportunities. We, in our state role, we're able to go after federal funding and then to administer it. So we're administering some ARPA funds. We announced 14 award recipients for ARPA funds for projects at public libraries around the state. And then we're building another program so that we can get another $10 million out, which is some housing and urban development funding that we were really lucky to get with some help from former Senator Leahy's office.
Sounds promising.
Yeah.
So let's shift a little bit to the world of education, which is where all our members are living. So I'm going to merge the next couple of questions. My understanding is they've asked you to do some research that's related to Act 139, the recent literacy bill, and you've shared some information about the value of reading and early literacy and overall children's health. If you could just talk about some of the things you've discovered in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Act 139 was revised to add a report requirement last session. So the department was asked to write a report related to early childhood literacy resources, specifically looking at gift book programs or book gifting programs and other supports that might be useful. So that was sort of the entry point for me to dive deep into this topic. That idea of book gifting programs keeps coming up in the legislature, and it's the type of thing that we want to be sure that we get right. We don't want to just say, oh yeah, we'll work with this one organization, they're the best known. And so to really try to get to the bottom of, do these programs work? How do they work? What really are we promoting? How does it really, what are the mechanisms of this? Is there any evidence that it works? I sort of broke down what I was trying to figure out and decided that I should start out looking at the literature on book gifting programs themselves and on other tools that people implement for that birth through age 3 age group, really focusing in on that group, because I know we've got great curriculum developed for grade school kids, preschoolers, but we're finding that the data is showing that when kids are getting to preschool, there are already some gaps, and that, you really have to figure out a way to bridge those gaps. And maybe gift book programs are the way, but I was sort of feeling like there's something else that could help. Because as a children's librarian for so many years, I knew that the work I was doing wasn't really focused at the kids. I knew the work was really focused at the parents. That the children, it's sort of washing over them, and they love their librarian and they want to give you their little boogery high five and a hug. But the moms in the room, the dads in the room, the nannies in the room, the grandparents in the room, they were getting a lot out of story time. And I had the really good fortune of being in a great library system. San Francisco Public has so many resources. And I had done Every Child Ready to Read training. And I had learned about phonological awareness and print motivation. And we had been trying to use those terms with the caregivers, the adults in the room, and they were looking at us in a glazed over way. And I wasn't sure, like, does that kind of a program really work? What is there? And how do we get to these people who are caregivers? And how do we make sure that they're supported so that they can support kids? And when I started looking at this originally a couple of years ago, when I first arrived, and a gift book program first was proposed, to my knowledge, there wasn't very much research. And we've actually seen a bunch of new research, and some meta-analyses have been done that were really interesting. And that was really where I began focusing. What research is there actually out there that talks about the effectiveness of story time, the effectiveness of the education that's focused on parents and on librarians, and how are these different book gifting programs working, and what are the gaps? Because sometimes with the book gifting programs, it's really focused on just deliver a book to the house, but there's not very much in the way of a scaffolding for the parents, what to do with the book, how to engage with the child in the book. What are we going for? Is the book at the right developmental level for the child? If a program starts out with a book that is for a 3-year-old, but it's coming to an infant, do you shelve the book until the child is 3? Like, how does that work? So it was really interesting. The Institute of Museum and Library Services did a meta-analysis that they published in 2023 that actually showed that the most effective of the 3 major programs that they looked at wasn't the most well-known of those programs, or the program that gave out the most books. They found that the American Academy of Pediatrics program, Reach Out and Read, was more effective than Book Start and the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. And they found that the impact that it was making was likely because of that parent education model. And another thing that impacts that program's success is that parents are in a mode of wanting to listen to the expert. When they bring their kid to the doctor hands the child the book at the beginning of the engagement and uses the book as a diagnostic tool and sees, what does the kid do with the book? Do they drop it on the floor? Do they push at it? Do they think it's like a phone? Like, what are they doing with this thing? Do they hand it to their parent? Like, hey, we read these together. What is it that they do? And then what intervention can that doctor do with some training on how to identify where that kid is? Are they at the right level? Just keep encouraging them. Is this the first time they've seen a book? We really need to write that prescription. Read a book every day to your child. Because the studies that I was looking at, both the national numbers and the Vermont numbers, I had looked at the child health data. The National Survey of Children's Health Indicator 6.7 is about like how many times a week does the child have someone read to them, the child 0 to age 5. And they break it down by, percentage of poverty level. And we do see that socioeconomic status plays a role there, like that the kids who are of a lower socioeconomic status are typically read to less than the kids from wealthier, more affluent families with more resources. But even among the families in Vermont that are at 400% of the poverty level, 30% still aren't being read to every day, according to this data. So that's a lot of people there who aren't hearing that message, that it's really important to read every day with your child, that it's really important to take that time. And if they haven't heard that message, they may not have heard the message of kind of how we do that engaged reading, how we encourage kids to really look at the book and think about it a little bit, instead of just reading the words quickly and getting through the book and reading it again. It's like it's really that relationship that they're building that has been found to be a key to success in school. And right at the tail end of our report writing, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a policy paper on reading together every day and the importance of that. And I really encourage folks to take a look at that because it was so well written, it was kind of daunting to me as I was about to embark on writing myself to read that in early December. And I was like, oh gosh, like they've said it so well. What am I going to say here? But they have really found that reading with your child every day doesn't just improve their communication skills or their reading skills. That relationship is foundational to their success in everything, their success in school, their success in life, the resilience. That relationship of reading is really getting them ready to pay attention for longer periods of time, helps them develop executive function, self-esteem, social behavior. I mean, these things are all so significant in getting a kid ready for success. And that core relationship with the parent around the book is such an important element. And that's why ultimately the department's recommendation in the report was to do a couple of things. One of them is to consider implementing Reach Out and Read at the state level because it has been shown to be really effective. And that trusted pediatrician is so key to that success. I think really finding parents at a space where they're ready to hear that tip. It's sort of my partner was told by the pediatrician, you've got to get your daughter to play the piano no matter what. So she plays the piano no matter what. So it's like, leverage that in another way. It's sort of the eat the vegetables, like, except how much more fun is reading together every day. But so that's one of the elements of it. But we're also really interested. We've already been doing this to some degree, but I want to roll out an even bigger program of education for public librarians around developing storytime programming and programming for children and their caregivers, parents, who to really focus on early childhood literacy, focusing on concepts of playing and learning and talking together, just natural things you're doing every day, but really connecting that with literacy and really modeling for parents how to read together, how to play together, that movement is important in the learning process, really focusing on some of the principles that are taught in Every Child Ready to Read and other similar programs. I think that that's something that is just really key, especially with the high degree of turnover in public library staff in the state that we've learned about. So really just kind of having those programs be an ongoing thing and really focusing on that as a department. Those are the two key components, but then also potentially a direct to the parents communication and some publicity around that, because we need to get everybody to read to kids every day, not just, to me, I feel like if 85% of kids are ready for kindergarten, like, what about that other 15%? Like, you've got it, it's a lot harder to get somebody from not ready to the readiness level when they haven't had those earlier supports. So we want to be sure that we're really doing everything we can to promote success for kids.
See, I want to come back to that in a second. I just want to follow up with two quick questions. So under this program, the reach out and read, it means that now pediatricians would make reading on a regular basis sort of a recommendation to improve child's health. What might that look like in a regular checkup, let's say, with your pediatrician?
So my understanding is that the program gives pediatricians some training in doing this, and that they also have kind of a collection of books that is selected for the age of the kids and the community that they serve. So languages that people in the community are reading. And then they basically, the first thing, it works best if it's the first thing that they do. They come into the room and they hand the child the book and they observe how that child interacts with the book and they see how the family interacts with the book. And that sometimes the pediatrician might even read the book and model it if it looks like the parent's not quite sure how to do it. My impression is that they do promote going to the library rather than just here's a book, this is the only book you need. Really, here's a book. There are tons of books at the library, and you really need to read to your child every day. Are you doing that now? Even to the extent of apparently writing prescriptions for reading every day to encourage parents to really make that a habit. I think that it's something that you can really see how that would be important for a person who hasn't gotten that message before to hear it from a trusted source. At the library, if you're coming in anyway, you probably know what we do, but there's a big group of people that we can't reach easily. And that's why one of the things that a program like Every Child Ready to Read does is you train the librarian who then goes out into the community and trains people at the child care centers or does a community workshop for the parents. So even in terms of what we might be able to do with a multi-pronged program, really developing training for parents on these principles so that they can, I think a lot of parents are reading books and looking on blogs and, watching blogs and trying to see like, how do we do this right? And I think that for those who have the resources and the know-how to do that, that's working really well. But how do we find people who may not be seeking that information? How do we go out there and make it so that they're part of the community of readers too? And I think that the connection that people get in the library setting as well is important. I remember years ago, this woman I knew she came to one of my story times with her little girl, and she seemed bedraggled, to be honest. She seemed a little bit under the weather, and she would come and she would be a little late. And then she became somebody who came twice a week to story time. And then she became like part of the mom group. And when she moved away, because she moved to a different part of the state, she came to me and she said, I have to thank you because I had postpartum depression and I didn't even know it. And it wasn't until I thought I should probably go to story time. Like I saw the other moms were doing this thing and I went, and she was talking about that community and how it kind of became her community of learning and supporting her kid. And it even pulled her out of that. It was one of the things that she credited with like pulling her out of that space that she was in and helping her to kind of re-engage with her child in the world. And it was shocking to me, quite honestly. And it was very powerful. And I felt like I hadn't done anything. I had just been singing about itsy bitsy spiders. But I think that is something that's going on, that parents who might be struggling, they can find success in reading a simple book with their kid. They can find success in like focusing on learning a little bit with others in their community. They can become a community of learners together and support one another. And I think that's really why that type of program is a successful one as well, because then the parents aren't alone. So that idea of the resilience of the child, and it's also a resilience of the parent that I think is being fostered by the daily practice of reading, but then also the reading in community is really, I think that we'll probably see more studies over time that support things that children's librarians have known for years, that work that is going on is really important. And it's really important to academic success and to our society's success.
That's a great story about the power of story. Thanks for sharing that. So we have a tradition in this podcast of ending with you having an opportunity to do a shout out to somebody who's been instrumental to your own development and developing the passions that you obviously have and share for books and literature and libraries. So the floor is yours to shout somebody out.
Oh my gosh, I wasn't sure who I should shout out. And now that I'm understanding the scope of the shout out, I don't usually do this, but I'm going to shout out my dad. My dad was My dad was an English teacher when I was a kid. He taught in Heinsberg Elementary School, and he read to me every day. I don't remember ever not being read to. Sometimes he would read so much that he fell asleep while reading, and we'd poke him, and he'd wake up and read again. But he also, because he was home in the summertime and was really into genealogy and probably didn't like reading the same books again and again, he always brought us to the library. He brought us to the old South Burlington Library at the high school. I could still remember its
Yeah.
peculiar library smell
Yeah.
and the orange carpets. And he also got us a library card at the Fletcher Free, and he brought us there. And yeah, he just really encouraged us to always be learning and always be reading. And um, I don't think I would be doing this if he hadn't done that.
A great shout out and a great way to close out the podcast. I would imagine our members would probably love to get their hands on that report that you're submitting. If you could send me that at some point, I'll pass it on
Yeah,
to our folks, and maybe access to the the APA paper as well. So if you can get that to me, I will share that with everybody. But thank you for taking the time, Catherine, and thanks for all this really important work you're leading.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been fun talking.